The studio lights of the View gleamed with the sharp brilliance that only live television could conjure. The chatter of the studio audience blended with the hum of production equipment and the faint buzz of tension that always filled the air before a big guest appearance. Producers and assistants darted between cameras, whispering last-minute cues into headsets, while the hosts adjusted their notes, their makeup, and their smiles. Today's episode promised fireworks. The morning's guest wasn't a pop star or politician, but one of the most renowned comedians in the world, Rowan Atkinson. Known to millions as Mr. Bean, Blackadder, and the face of an entire generation's humor, Atkinson rarely gave interviews, especially not in the unpredictable arena of daytime talk television. That fact alone had every producer both thrilled and terrified. Backstage, Rowan sat calmly in the green room, legs crossed, tea in hand. The noise around him didn't seem to reach his bubble of stillness. He was reading over the show's rundown, a small frown playing at the corner of his mouth as his eyes scanned Joy Behar's name. "Ah," he murmured under his breath, "the one who likes to argue for sport." He wasn't dreading it, not quite. Rowan had faced tougher crowds and sharper critics. But he knew the View had a reputation for getting loud when opinions clashed. And his opinions, especially on modern comedy and the fragility of public discourse, were not exactly aligned with the show's tone. A stagehand peeked through the door. "Mr. Atkinson, we'll be ready for you in 2 minutes." Rowan looked up, offered a polite nod, and smiled faintly. "Splendid. I suppose there's still time to regret everything, isn't there?" The stagehand laughed awkwardly, not sure if he was joking. On stage, Joy Behar was in full swing. "So, apparently," she said, gesturing animatedly, "our next guest has some thoughts about people being too sensitive." "Well, I've got some thoughts too, and I'm not too sensitive to share them." The audience chuckled, applauding as Whoopi rolled her eyes. "Be nice, Joy," Whoopi said with a grin. "He's a guest, not a target." "We'll see," Joy muttered, smirking. As the producer counted down from 5, the theme music blared, and Whoopi faced the camera with her signature warm authority. "Welcome back to The View. Our next guest is a global comedy icon whose work has spanned decades, from Mr. Bean to Johnny English and everything in between. Please welcome Rowan Atkinson." Applause filled the studio. Rowan stepped onto the stage, smiling politely as he gave a courteous nod to the hosts. The audience roared their approval, and a few even stood. He reached the table, shook hands with Whoopi, Sarah, and Sunny, and offered Joy a small bow of greeting. "Welcome, Rowan," Whoopi began. "It's great to have you here." "Lovely to be here," he replied in his distinctly dry, measured British tone. "Though I must say, your audience claps so enthusiastically, I'm half convinced I owe them money." Laughter rippled through the room. The first few questions were light. Talk about his career, his process, and his famous ability to evoke laughter without a single line of dialogue. Rowan shared anecdotes about filming Mr. Bean in the rain, his philosophy of physical comedy, and how silence often says more than words ever could. Then Sunny turned the conversation toward his new project, a Netflix special about the lost art of humor. Rowan explained that the series explored how laughter had changed in an age where offense was often treated as injury, and that's when Joy pounced. "So you've said before that comedians should be allowed to joke about anything," Joy said, leaning forward, her expression both curious and skeptical. "Do you really believe that in today's world, where people are trying to be more sensitive, more aware, that's still okay?" Rowan smiled politely. "I believe humor should challenge us," he said. "The point of comedy is to highlight absurdity, to expose the silliness of human behavior. If it's never uncomfortable, it's not really doing its job." Joy raised an eyebrow. "But don't you think there's a difference between being uncomfortable and being offensive?" "Of course," Rowan said, tilting his head. "But that distinction is personal. What offends you might delight someone else. If we censor everything that might offend someone, we end up with no comedy at all." The audience murmured in agreement, a few clapping softly. Joy didn't. "Well, Maybe some comedians should think a little harder about who they're making fun of. There's a power imbalance in comedy. It's easy to punch down. Rowan nodded thoughtfully, but his eyes carried a subtle glint of steel. Yes, but it's also easy to claim you're being punched when you simply don't like the joke. I think sometimes we confuse discomfort with harm. That drew another ripple of reaction from the audience. Laughter, applause, and a few surprised gasps. Whoopi, sensing the rising tension, interjected with a laugh. "Rowan, you're stirring the pot here." "Only gently," he replied, his tone light. "I wouldn't want to bruise it." Joy smiled thinly. "So you don't think comedians should face any consequences for their words?" "Oh, I didn't say that," Rowan replied smoothly. "If a comedian isn't funny, their consequence is silence. If they are funny and people still don't like it, well, that's their problem, not the comedian's." Joy's tone sharpened. "That's convenient, isn't it? To just say, if you don't like it, don't watch. But words do have consequences." "They always have," Rowan said, unflinching. "But somewhere along the line, we began treating every joke as a moral statement instead of a reflection. Humor used to be our way of processing absurdity. Now it's treated like evidence at a trial." That earned louder applause and visibly irritated Joy. "Well, I guess some people can make jokes without consequences because of who they are," she said pointedly. "It's a little easier when you're not the target." Rowan's expression didn't change, but his voice cooled a fraction. "And yet," he said, "I've been the target of ridicule for 40 years. The difference is I laughed." The crowd roared, but Joy leaned back, unfazed. "Maybe because you were the one holding the microphone." There was a flicker in Rowan's eyes now, not anger exactly, but resolve. He clasped his hands together, resting them on the table, and spoke with quiet precision. The moment the red light on the camera went dark and the view cut to commercial, the studio air shifted from television energy to raw, unfiltered tension. The audience murmured nervously, some whispering excitedly to each other, others glancing toward the stage, where Rowan Atkinson and Joy Behar sat frozen in an uneasy silence. Rowan didn't move at first. He sat still, his posture calm but his eyes distant, fixed on a point just beyond the lights. The laughter that had once filled the studio was gone. The applause sign blinked uselessly, ignored. Producers huddled at the edge of the set, exchanging frantic whispers. "Okay, let's cool this down," one said through her headset. "We're live again in 60. Someone reset the tone. Whoopi, maybe jump in first next segment." But the tension wasn't going anywhere. Joy leaned back in her chair, her hand on her mug, jaw set tight. She spoke just loud enough for the table to hear, her voice low and edged. "You know, Rowan, you could have just said you think people are too touchy. All this philosophy doesn't change the fact you sound like you're defending bad behavior." Rowan turned to her. His expression still mild, but his tone carried a coolness that silenced the few lingering whispers in the audience. "I'm defending the idea that laughter shouldn't require permission. That's all." "Yeah, well," Joy said with a brittle chuckle, "maybe laughter shouldn't come at someone else's expense." He tilted his head. "And yet, I suspect if I made a joke about British tea or my own clumsiness, you'd laugh without needing to ask who got hurt. Comedy doesn't come at anyone's expense. It comes from recognizing we're all absurd, equally." Whoopi leaned forward, trying to mediate. Okay, you two. Let's take a breath. We're coming back in 30. Let's not turn this into the View battle of the philosophers." But it was too late. The next segment was already poised for combustion. The commercial ended. Cameras rolled again. The audience clapped dutifully, though their applause carried an anxious undercurrent. Whoopi's practiced smile flickered slightly as she tried to steer the conversation back toward safe ground. "Welcome back," she began smoothly. "We're talking with the one and only Rowan Atkinson, and things got a little spirited before the break. Let's keep it going, yeah?" Joy gave a wry smirk. "Spirited. That's one word for it." Rowan smiled faintly, a calm kind of British detachment radiating from him. "I thought we were having a discussion. I didn't realize I'd been enrolled in a duel." The audience laughed uncertainly, sensing the undercurrent of sarcasm beneath his politeness. Whoopi chuckled, trying to deflect. "Don't worry, Rowan, you're not dueling anyone. We just like to debate here." "Ah," Rowan said, glancing toward Joy, "and some of us enjoy winning more than listening, I suspect." The audience oohed. Joy's smile faltered for the briefest moment.